Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Here in Washington, we have our eyes on Capitol Hill, specifically on the Senate, after we spent weeks watching the House of Representatives and the wrangling that it took to get the House Republican Conference in line to pass President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill, as it is actually, this legislation is actually now called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Remember, it took a lot of arm wrestling from the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, but also from President Trump himself. In some ways, arguably, Joe, it's President Trump that's acting as the majority whip. I don't know where Tom Emmer is in any of this, but the question is going to be, can President Trump play that role as well? Yeah. In the United States Senate, where the dynamics are a little bit different, though certainly we see evidence today of the president trying.
Dynamics are really different, as John Thune would tell you, beginning with SALT. You don't have senators, Republican senators, in SALT states, which is the beginning of just a long list of different ideas that are going to be coming out of the upper chamber. Whether they make them into legislation has yet to be seen. Tyler Kendall is standing by at the White House for us right now. Bloomberg Washington correspondent with her eye on the administration's take on this, because, Tyler, that does seem to be the energy center is on President Trump's end of Pennsylvania Avenue right now, right?
Yeah, hey, Joe. President Trump really trying to ramp up the pressure on these Senate Republicans, making phone calls, posting on Truth Social, as you've been mentioning, because we have to keep in mind here, the White House is dealing with some pretty conflicting demands when it comes to these Republicans that want to make changes to the House bill. On one hand, you have this group of senators pitching themselves as fiscal hawks. Rand Paul, you mentioned, also Senator Ron Johnson, who had a phone call with President Trump yesterday, says he has plans to meet with the White House's economic team, and he wants to see some deeper spending cuts. But of course, on the other hand here, we have those concerns from Republicans about what changes to benefit programs could ultimately mean, particularly when it comes to Medicaid, perhaps speeding up those work requirements. Also, the House's plan to freeze the Medicaid provider tax, have some of the states take on more of that cost sharing. These are all raising concerns and really is a politically fraught issue for this White House. President Trump doubling down in recent posts on Truth Social, saying that the bill will not cut Medicaid, but there are analysis out there, including one that we cite here at Bloomberg News, that predicts 7.7 million people by 2034 could ultimately lose coverage because of a shifting in the eligibility requirements. So they really are going to have to thread the needle here to make everybody happy and ultimately to pass this bill. I could keep going. Of course, it's the big, beautiful bill, so there's a lot of other provisions where we're seeing disagreements. But Joe and Kailey, we have to keep in mind, they can only lose 3 Republicans at the end of the day, and we know there are many more than that are raising concerns.
Yeah, Rand Paul says he thinks there are at least 4 who could be ready to stop this thing in its tracks, knowing that the White House is up against a kind of self-imposed deadline, if you will, that Senator Thune, Tyler, seems to be going along with. They want this done by July 4th. When would that mean it actually leaves the Senate, if it still has to go back to the House, if it's to get to the president's desk by Independence Day?
Right, exactly, Kailey. It's definitely an expedited timeline. Senator Tom Tillis, a Republican from North Carolina, did tell reporters yesterday that the Senate's current plan, their goal, is to get some of those Medicaid and tax changes over to the White House to review by this weekend, and then to push more of a fuller draft of the package in the next 10 to 15 days. This would be incredibly expedited. Now, of course, they want to see this done by July 4th because that ultimately gives lawmakers a little bit of buffer room here against what really is going to be that hard deadline, which of course is the X date. We even had Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent really say that that is going to be what adds fuel to the fire for these lawmakers, because it is one big beautiful bill. So they are of course also attaching a hike to the debt ceiling. And we were talking about Senator Rand Paul before. His biggest point of opposition is that this bill ends up lifting that ceiling. But when you look at the details of this, the House plan lifts it by $4 trillion, Joe and Kailey, but the Senate has said there's enough runway to lift it up to by $5 trillion. So there's still disagreement even among that issue too.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall live on the North Lawn of the White House. Thank you so much. As we consider the positions of various senators here, Senator Cynthia Lummis, the Republican from Wyoming, was on Bloomberg TV and radio in the last hour saying that there are changes she needs to see on Medicaid, specifically if she's to vote yes for this bill. And we had a similar conversation with one of her colleagues, Senator Kevin Cramer of North Dakota, joined us on the late edition of Balance of Power yesterday. And we asked him if he'd be prepared to vote yes as it stands right now. This is what he told us.
I want this to pass, but there's no reason that the Senate should just simply rubber stamp it when we can do so much better. I think it was interesting listening to the leader from the House say they don't think there's any way to find more savings, and I think that's really the thing we have to do. We will not be able to pass the bill without finding some more spending cuts. I do think, though, by and large, it will look similar to the House bill, but we just may be able to find some other places for savings.
So for more on where exactly they might be able to find savings, just how big these changes to the numbers might be, we turn to Bill Hoagland, Senior Vice President at the Bipartisan Policy Center and former Republican Staff Director for the Senate Budget Committee, who was here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. Bill, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Always good to have you. When you look at what you're hearing from the various factions in the Senate, those who want steeper cuts, those who think the cuts maybe go too far, who would you anticipate wins out here? Or do they actually cancel each other out and we're not going to see many changes at all?
No, I think there'll be changes in the bill, and I think it is likely that they will come together. There's a lot of pressure being put on, particularly as it relates to if they do not put something together here, the tax increases that will take place will hit 68% of all those out there who file taxes, one way or the other, how much that is. But certainly there will be pressure. Changes will take place. They'll have to take place. There's no question in my mind that there are a number of provisions in this bill that the House sent over that are what we call birdable, in the sense that they do not belong in this bill. They have no budgetary consequence. And so it will change. Now, the question I would ask, though, is to get it done and on the president's desk by July the 4th is a rather expedited process, but what that tells me is that the Senate will have to negotiate what they pass, the House will have to just simply take up and pass. And that's where the difficulty is going to lie in terms of can they put a bill together in the Senate that the House can simply take and pass.
Should we assume that the current policy baseline accounting method is okay with the parliamentarian? Will that be the case in the Senate?
Well, Joe, that's a very good question. It's a question that I've been asking myself for quite some time.
Mike Johnson seems to be making this assumption.
I think that being an old budgeteer, I don't think that it passes the test that is necessary to get around a bird rule. There is a problem here with the current policy baseline, and I don't want to get into the weeds here, but it does impact upon what we call the bird rule, which is adding to the deficit beyond the 10-year window, in which case then it would be it would violate the process. And historically, I've been out of the 23, 24 reconciliation bills that have been enacted over the 50-year history of the Budget Act, I participated in about 20 of them, I guess. And we've always used current law, not current policy. But at the same time, I will tell you what I'm picking up, and as an old budgeteer who thinks deficits and debt matter, I'm picking up it doesn't really matter right now. They aren't concerned about the debt and deficit, and that's disconcerting to me, if nothing else.
Well, we've also heard from the majority leader, Senator Thune contends that actually it's up to Senator Lindsey Graham, who leads the Budget Committee, to decide whether current policy baseline is justified or not. Do you see John Thune as being willing to defy the parliamentarian on that or any issue?
No, I don't. I think the majority leader has, I understood, made it very clear he's not going to question the parliamentarian. And therefore, I don't think he would go beyond the parliamentarian's advice. Now, again, the parliamentarian gives the advice to the chair. The chair rules, not the parliamentarian. And so it's possible the chair could say current policy is fine and we'll go forward with it. It's an unanswerable question, Joe. I'm sorry at this point to give you that answer.
Well, this is, we're getting to the rub here. I mean,
yes.
The old line that the Senate is the saucer that cools the tea.
Senate.
Is it going to be the opposite this time?
I think the Senate is going to certainly modify the House, the hot tea of the House, and
turn up the heat under the tea.
But honestly, this is going to be a very dicey exercise, obviously, for the majority leader in the Senate, because he has to also make sure that whatever he passes can get passed back into the House and it not fail in the House, too. So getting the two sides, the ones who want more deficit reduction and those who don't want to make the particular reductions that are necessary, this is going to be a very, very difficult exercise for the new majority leader.
When we consider the Medicaid issue specifically, President Trump is contending that there are false statements being made, that these are not Medicaid cuts that are happening. We've been told the same by many Republicans on this program, including Congresswoman Ashley Hinson last night, who told us that this is just fear-mongering on the Democrats. This isn't about cuts. It's about making sure the program can last long term. How realistically should we be framing these Medicaid alterations, cuts, whatever you want to call them?
I think I think there's truth in both arguments that are being put forth. Number one, work requirements. Are the work requirements a cut? No, if they're requiring individuals to participate in the Medicaid program, and if they choose not to because of the work requirement, is that a cut? I don't know. At the same time, the provider tax that's in there does impact directly, I think, nursing homes, rural hospitals. That could feed back to being real cuts on individuals. So when the CBO makes the estimate, and your reporter indicated also about 6.7 million, 7 million people that would be removed from the Medicaid rolls because of this, I think it's hard to say there aren't going to be reductions here. And particularly the one area that should be focused on, I think, as coming from a rural area myself, is the rural hospitals. They could very well be hit by the provider tax. One other thing I want to make, Kailey, that point I would make is that we should also look at the SNAP program, the food stamp program, and the changes that are being proposed there, which are work requirements also, but also the requirement that the states pick up a particular share. Right now, the SNAP benefit itself is 100% federal. If you're asking the states to pick that up, for the SNAP benefits, and then you're asking the states to pick up the administrative cost associated with the work requirement. There are going to be some major shifts in administrative costs to the states, and those are, a lot of them are red states, and so when those red state governors start calling their senator, I think it will make some changes.
Well, you're really putting your finger on. So Jim Justice knows this, which is why he's been talking about it. Republican senators with big rural communities in their states are deeply concerned about that provider tax. They see nursing homes closing, rural hospitals closing. Does that mean Republicans crank back the changes to Medicaid? I
think there will be some changes in the Medicaid program, particularly coming out of that. You've reported so many times here. We got Susan Collins, who has concerns. You have Murkowski has concerns.
That's right.
Josh Hawley, of all people, conservative senator, has concerns about that. These are big issues in rural areas of the country and rural hospitals. Yes, I think there will be changes.
Well, as we wait to see what those changes are in the Senate, the House is also going to be taking up some work this week, as the White House is now formally sharing a rescission package with the House. PBS, NPR, USAID funding, I think it amounts to about $9 billion.
$9 billion.
Bill, I think they're going to make a big deal out of this, but is this a big deal or is it a drop in a bucket?
Well, $9 billion is nothing to snuff at, and I would say that, yes, it is a big deal. The question here is, I'm not clear, I haven't seen the proposal yet, whether it's the $9 billion is made up of basically the USAID funds and then the public radio and public communication. And my sense here is if they put those two together as one package, it probably does pass the House. I'm not sure it passes the Senate, though. Again, we're back to the rural areas that depend a lot about some of the corporate broadcasting systems that are out there. Not to take anything away from Bloomberg at all, of course, but definitely. Yeah. So, yes, that's it. One thing you should know is that this is probably just the start of rescission. This is something under the Impoundment Control Act. The president has every right to propose to Congress the elimination of funding that has been made available. My sense is there's going to be a lot more coming later in the year.
Yeah? Will that be coming with help from the DOJ, or is that a separate?
Well, it's separate from DOJ, but the DOJ proposals that now take actual form in the form of a rescission that would be submitted to Congress. I don't want to get into the weeds too far here, but you have 45. Congress has 45 days to act on a rescission package once it's submitted. Either you approve it or you don't approve it. And if you wait until, say, the middle of the August recess and you propose those, it is possible that those rescissions would go in effect without any action by Congress. This is what we call line item rescission veto. Yeah. And so be aware that there's some more coming.
And that can happen during a recess, is what you're
Only
saying.
it can. It's not. They're not on official recess. Okay. There's continuous session. They will not go on recess during the August
so you keep one
vacation.
Pro
forma
the pro forma largely so that they can avoid recess appointments.
Right. Wow. We have
Remember
so
when
much
we were
to
having a
look forward
conversation about recess appointments every day?
Yes, we were.
Around the cabinet nominees.
Just wait, it'll come back around. We'll call Bill Hoagland. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Bill, as always. A veteran of the Senate, now with the Bipartisan Policy Center, and giving us a real sense, Kailey, of what we can look for with changes that are coming out of this bill. You wonder if Donald Trump told John Thune to keep it the way it is.
Yeah, well, certainly the Speaker of the House hasn't been shy about doing that, saying, Mr. Majority Leader, you need to change this as little as possible if you want me to be able to pass it a second time. We'll see how much louder the voice of the president gets on this.
Yeah, may not be very practical for John Thune in the meantime. Stay with us. We're going to assemble our political panel next. Maura Gillespie, Kristen Hahn, no strangers to this debate, will be up with us here on Balance of Power. Alongside Kailey Leinz, I'm Joe Mathieu. Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
I'm Kailey Leinz alongside Joe Mathieu live in Washington, where we are focused on the United States Senate, as we will be probably all week for the weeks to come, basically leading up until when they leave for the July 4th recess, which is actually the last week of June, is the last week they're scheduled to be in session. And the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, has suggested he would like to see a bill pass through the Senate, sent back to the House, and passed through the House on the president's desk by the 4th of July. So the time is short. And there's a lot of people that still need to be made happy here, including Republican Senator Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, who is not yet a yes, she says, on this bill. There's still some things she would like to see changed, including when it comes to Medicaid. She said this on Bloomberg TV and radio earlier.
I would like to see some reforms to Medicaid. This is not in an effort to remove benefits from those who were intended to have it, but rather to stop the states from using a mechanism to enrich their federal participation dollars. And 49 states are doing it. It would require the reform of the state's loophole for me to support the Medicaid reforms.
She's talking about changes to the provider tax, which, as we were just discussing with Bill Hoagland, is a problem for a lot of Republican senators who represent rural states. The fear that it could lead to the closures of rural hospitals or nursing homes. It's where we start our conversation with our political panel. Republican strategist Maura Gillespie is with us, the founder of Blue Stack Strategies. Kristen Hahn, Democratic strategist and partner at Rock Solutions. Great to see both of you here. Maura, what's your sense of this? If Republican senators start to tinker with this deal on Medicaid, you worked for a former Republican Speaker of the House. Is it DOA? When it comes back to the lower chamber, what happens?
No, the pressure does begin to mount, though, on making sure it can still get done. Again, I think that the biggest issue here is the role that the president will play in pressuring these members, especially in the House side, to accept what the Senate has done with the bill and get it done before, realistically, the August recess. I think that's the more likely scenario. But Senator John Thune is going to let this kind of work its will through the Senate, and you're seeing that play out and talking about the benefits and some of the issues there with rural states. You know, Missouri is one that I know they have deep concerns about that provision that Senator Lummis talked about. So you're going to have a couple of these senators that are going to raise their, red flag as saying this is non-negotiable. They have a little bit more staying power, as far as some of them aren't out for re-election this cycle, and they're not up in the midterms, whereas the House is going to have to play ball more so when it comes to Donald Trump's pressure.
So is that another way of saying, Maura, that the Senate actually does have a great deal more leverage here, might not be as easily moved by either the leader, John Thune, or by President Trump himself?
They do, just because of the fact that the House is up for re-election in 2026, and several of the senators that are speaking out, some are up for re-election in 26, but again, they represent a larger swath of the American public, and so their objectives here, they do have more legs to stand on as far as being able to push back on these provisions that the House pushed through.
What's your sense of this, Kristen Hahn, as a Democrat watching a Republican-only exercise? Do you expect that the House signs off on whatever comes back?
I mean, I think that if they want to ultimately get this done, they're going to have to. I worked in the House side when we had a Democratic Senate, a Democratic House, and President Obama in the White House, and it was a frustrating thing for the House staff and the members, because we would send something over to the Senate and that would come back to us, and we call it sticking the House. I mean, if the president wants to get it done, I think he's just going to have to force the members of the House to do it. And then a lot of them are going to be in some really tough spots if they get this done because of what we were discussing, heavy cuts to Medicaid and how that will impact a lot of rural America. And I know that there are a lot of members of the House who are very concerned about that coming back.
Well, when we consider those swing districts in 2026 and the messaging war that is going to be fought in them, Kristen, we were told last night by one Republican lawmaker that Democrats are just fear-mongering on this. President Trump is saying the same. How do you think voters will actually view this Medicaid issue? Is it just semantics to them?
I mean, you look at these town halls in a lot of these Republican or red districts, and people are fearful. They're scared, and that's not something that the National Democratic Party has ginned up. That's what's happening on the ground. People are they're upset, and they're voicing their opinions, and they're going to voice their opinions at the ballot box. So, I was very, actually, as a comms person, very impressed with Republicans in the House who had been very concerned about this leading up to the vote for the bill. But once they voted for it, they were all speaking off of the same playbook, saying the Democrats are fear mongering. And this isn't actually, we're just, people who are not citizens of the United States shouldn't have Medicaid. I mean, they're doing a good job of talking about it up in D.C. and Washington on television. But at home, people are concerned, and that's what they should be concerned about in 2026 for sure.
What is it, Maura, that gets President Trump out of the White House back up on Capitol Hill? You know there's going to be a tough meeting at some point where everybody goes behind closed doors so they can be cajoled or even shamed by the president. We're starting with phone calls, but when does the personal visit happen? Does that push this across the line?
It will likely be when it goes back to the House. I think you're going to see some of these cuts, in terms of SNAP. Chuck Grassley has been pretty adamant about that one, that he doesn't like the House version of it. And so several members of the Senate don't like that either. And the discrepancy there between what the Senate wants versus what the House wants, it's pretty massive. So I think when we see how that plays out, and then again with the Medicaid discussion, the messaging there is important. And I think that Kristen hit on that a little bit there about what they're saying about fear mongering, but they're also talking about there needs to be a accountability when it comes to Medicaid, and the programs themselves are not sustainable if we don't get a handle on the fraud, waste, and abuse, both in Medicaid and Medicare. And so being able to talk to your constituents, going home and doing town halls, even though they're challenging and even though they're very difficult and you do get yelled at, it's important to hear your constituents, hear them out, and explain to them what it is that you're looking to do as a member of Congress. And that messaging war, unfortunately, if they're not successful, Donald Trump will have to come in and let them know here's what's happening, and he'll have to maybe make some promises about going to their districts and going in to help them during their reelection. I think that kind of a conversation between the conference and the president is going to be pretty important, especially with some of these holdouts who are concerned about the impact for their reelection.
I do want to mention that at this hour, the White House press secretary, Karoline Leavitt, is holding court in the briefing room, answering questions from reporters. She did just make a little bit of news confirming that President Trump, as you can see live on Bloomberg TV as well as on Bloomberg Originals, will be attending the NATO summit later this month. That, of course, is being held just after the G7 meeting, which he is also attending. I would imagine the war in Ukraine will feature heavily on that agenda. But she's also speaking to the efforts on Capitol Hill, as she notes that the White House will be sending a rescissions package today to the House, but is talking about the big, beautiful bill as well. She says Republicans opposing the big, beautiful bill are wrong. And Kristen, she also is pointing out specifically the CBO being wrong, at least in her words, historically, on the economic impacts of such legislation. We have seen a lot of Republican ire thrown at the CBO specifically. Do they have a point? Should we be taking CBO estimates at face value?
Well, I think, we've said this before on this show, that people tend to really lean on the CBO and love on the CBO when they agree with their assessment, and then, and not when they don't. So this is a tale as old as time, and people have gone after the CBO forever. But I think that, the CBO plays an important role, clearly, in any piece of legislation that has an impact on our debt and deficit and spending in this country. And they're the ones that are actually looking at it not through a political lens. So I think it's important to take what they're saying seriously.
Is this a party in power thing or a Republican thing, though, Maura? I remember the Biden White House embracing CBO scoring. What's Republicans' allergy to what is a nonpartisan outfit with years of experience inside the Congress? They're not going to start dynamic scoring tomorrow, apparently, but what are they doing wrong?
Well, I think for a lot of Republicans, but I think it goes across the aisle as well. The CBO score is one aspect of the viability of a piece of legislation, but it also really does come down to the messaging of it and the will of the people behind it and the power of the members who are pushing it forward. So it's not the end all be all. And I think that that's how Republicans have viewed it for a long time. Sure, they have to get the bill scored, but it doesn't necessarily make or break whether that bill has the piece of legislation has viability. And so looking at it through that lens, that's more or less how Republicans have largely viewed the CBO. But to Kristen's point, I mean, the hypocrisy about it kind of runs the gamut on Capitol Hill. You love it when it loves you, and you hate it when it hates you back. So that seems to be the consensus there.
Well, speaking of hate, I do want to call attention to a post that just hit the wire on X, specifically from the man who owns it, Elon Musk, taking to X and saying the following, quote, "I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it." Kristen, is this what happens when Elon Musk leaves Washington?
I guess so. Man, he didn't have a long tenure here, and he certainly doesn't have the stomach for the politics, particularly when you're talking about dealing with issues that are this big. But that's certainly interesting. I wonder if he and the president had some sort of call. I don't know what's going on there, but it's always interesting to see what he says. I don't disagree with him necessarily. So.
Sounds like they broke up.
Yeah.
That's not what President Trump is saying about the bill.
And this goes well beyond just a bill can't be both big and beautiful that
Correct.
He said on CBS last week.
An abomination.
This is much harsher.
Disgusting abomination.
Language. Shame on those who voted for it, he says. I wonder if we'll be hearing from President Trump about this one, or if this will work its way into the White House briefing that is currently happening with Kailey Leavitt. Thank you very much to our political panel, Kristen Hahn and Maura Gillespie. Always great to have you here on Balance of Power. As we watch The Wire on X, watch The Wires on the terminal as well. We'll be back for more in just a moment on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts, or watch us live on YouTube.
Want to add the voice, as I mentioned, of a stakeholder here. We talk about SALT aid all day long, and if you live in one of the SALT states, well, I guess you are a stakeholder. But sometimes it's interesting to talk to somebody beyond an elected official here, because from lawmakers to lobbyists, this is a big deal right now in the throes of this debate. Colin Allen is executive director of the American Property Owners Alliance and joins me right now here in Washington, D.C. Colin, welcome. It's good to see you.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate
Did I
being here.
describe you right as a stakeholder in this debate?
Absolutely. Yeah. We at the American Property Owners Alliance, we were founded in 2020 to represent the interests of individual homeowners and small property owners across the country, right? So SALT is a huge issue for people who own property across the country. You're not seeing the local taxes go down, right? As home values continue to go up, and local governments look to fund priorities. Sometimes even as you're seeing the federal government shrink, what they're looking to do, right? You're going to need to see some of the local governments pick up the slack, and the way they do that is through property taxes. So I know living here in the DC area, both the valuation and the assessment went up on properties in the county that I live in this year. So it's been a while since we've seen that, and it's coming to you.
Well, talk to me about what the Alliance is doing. We should be clear. You're a 50C4 advocacy organization, so you can actually engage in lobbying and political activities. Do you have force behind this right now? Are you calling lawmakers about this?
That is correct. We're working to make sure that what we've seen is the House has given us a good provision here with $40,000 in SALT relief. That would cover most of what you'd see from a property owner. And what we were urging is for the Senate to finish the job here.
Yeah. Keep it where it is. Do you like the deal struck in the House?
The deal in the House is a good deal, and it'll cover, again, what we're looking at here is property taxes for the vast majority of Americans.
Well, listen, if you're lobbying this issue, you know more about this than anybody who's reading or hearing anything. You're on the front lines of the debate. What are you hearing from the Senate? Are they actually going to keep this intact? Because you know what the line is. There's no such thing as a SALT state in the Senate. If you're a senator, if you're a Republican senator, your state's not too worried about this issue right now.
Yeah. So what we're hearing, and I'd say look towards, the person that I've looked to recently is Senator Markwayne Mullin from Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Not just because I like what he's saying about SALT.
He's afraid of making big changes as a former congressman, I think, isn't he?
And I think look to him as a good gauge here, right? That he is still very in touch. He's a relatively new senator. Yeah. Been there for about 2.5 years and still has really good connections with the House leadership, especially on the Ways and Means Committee and the leadership of the House. So I think he is having those conversations and in a really good position to be a gauge for what the House may or may not be able to do from the Senate.
I wasn't kidding when I was talking to Tyler. When we do SALT stories, they become the most read on the terminal. When I talk about it on the air, all of a sudden my terminal lights up. I get email, I get tweets, because so many Bloomberg viewers and listeners understand this story, and so many are impacted by it. If you're living in a state, though, where you do not have high property taxes, and they're talking about a blue state bailout, what's the answer to that? Because this is the debate we're in.
So I think one of the things, and try to illustrate that a little earlier, right, is that as we are continuing to see the value of homes appreciate, right, we're undersupplied, we're not building enough new supply is not coming onto the market. What we're seeing is that the values of homes continue to get more and more expensive. Sure. And I'd say as you look to the federal government maybe shrinking some of the responsibilities that they're looking at, a lot of those services are not necessarily going to go away, right? They're going to go to the states, they're going to go to the localities. And the biggest way that those organizations, those units of government fund their priorities is through taxes on property. So I'd say as we continue to see these increasing valuations and local property taxes going up, this is an issue that is going to creep across the country.
Well, you don't only have your ear on this debate on Capitol Hill, you have your ear on the market. That's the reason why you exist at the Alliance. And I want to follow up on what you just mentioned, because it's really interesting looking at the dynamics in this market. And we had new numbers by Redfin that you probably saw. Axios published today. A buyer's market, if you can afford it. There are nearly 500,000 more home sellers than buyers in the U.S. housing market. How long can this last?
So I think, and I was listening, actually, funny enough, this morning on the way in, listening to a podcast with Logan Mohtashami from Housing Wire, kind of looking at that. And I think debunked maybe some of the numbers. I think his exact comment was, "I'm going to give this a yellow card." Unclear where that number is coming from, right? I think it may be a proprietary formula from Redfin, but definitely something that you're seeing there. And what we may be seeing is maybe not this like imminent crash of 20 to 40% that I think you'll see some of the trolls on online talking about.
When we use these kind of hackneyed terms. Is that not true?
I think we're probably coming back into more of an alignment, right? Where you're having a little bit more supply coming online, and buyers are coming out and saying, hey, maybe I understand that interest rates are not coming back down to 3 or 4%. I'm going to take advantage of where I am. I still have my job is good. I've had a change in my life circumstance, right? We've had a kid, I've gotten married, whatever it is, and I do feel that the time now is right, and that we're in a pretty good.
What would happen?
Situation.
We can't all live our lives around interest rates and whatever. You get a job, sometimes you got to move, or sometimes you need to or want to move. What happens if the Fed starts to cut? What if we get 50 basis points this year or more? What would that do to the market?
I think you would see an immediate interest in folks getting in and buying
People
mortgages,
start listing
right?
and buying. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think that is very much, some of the folks who may be sitting on the sidelines, right?
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that we talk about on the capital gains side, is that you've got especially older, longer tenured folks who've lived in their homes for a long time, may want to take advantage of getting in there and selling a property if they've been locked in, for a long time, and say, maybe I'll downsize now. It makes sense, where it didn't
in place for a long time.
Exactly, where it didn't make sense at 6.5%. Maybe it makes more sense at 5.5%.
You're telling us you think SALT stays where it is when it comes back to the House?
I think it's certainly open for debate, right? I used to be where I came from was that I would start off and say, I think the Senate is kind of they'd take the House bill, send it back, and say, you guys can eat whatever we passed, right?
Yes, exactly. Will the Senate try to jam the House again?
I really feel like you saw this bill
bring the rapture.
You saw this bill pass with one vote,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
I think we're just in a fundamentally different spot here. I feel good. I've heard a number of different things mentioned, but I'm going to follow Senator Mullins' lead on this one and say I think we're in a good spot.
He's part of the driving force behind the SALT cap, keeping it lifted. Colin Allen, American Property Owners Alliance. Great conversation. I appreciate your coming in to see us in studio, Colin. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.